guys, it's Shara from Woodshop Diaries, and today I'm going to show you how I turned a basic 2x10 construction lumber board into these fake live edge shelves. This was a really fun project, and I'm really excited to show you how they came together. So if you're ready to get building, let's go. Live edge projects are all over the place these days. But in my tiny town, lumber selection is limited, and no one within a 2-hour drive has much to pick from as far as live edge slabs go. So after thinking about it for almost a full year, I finally decided to give making my own fake live edge a try from some basic construction lumber. I'm honestly surprised at how well these turned out. You may still be able to tell that they're pine boards if you look close enough, but for about $11 in lumber, I'd say it's a reasonable knockoff. So if you're ready to see how I made these fake live edge shelves, let's get building. This project was sponsored by my friends at the Home Depot as part of the Prospective program. I've included links to the tools used in this video, plus a written step-by-step tutorial for the project in the description below if you'd like to check them out. I wanted to try something small for my first attempt at this, so I made 2 small shelves from a 2x10. These were really great for getting started, and I definitely want to try this again on a larger scale project in the future, but for now, I just wanted to practice on something small. I began by cutting the 2x10 board into 4 pieces roughly 24 inches long. They didn't have to be exact, I just used 2 pieces for each shelf. Then I separated the boards into pairs for 2 separate shelves. I began with the piece that I wanted to use for the back and used a pencil to kind of freehand a live edge shape. Now ideally you'd want to find a board with some crooked grain that you can kind of trace along. The more you can trace along the grain, the more realistic that it will look. Unfortunately, wildly crooked grain isn't super common among basic construction grade pine, so I just kind of tried to keep the shape as realistic looking as possible. Nothing too crazy. I did this along the top and the bottom edge of the backboard piece. Then I used a jigsaw to cut along this line. You can bevel the blade on the jigsaw if you'd like, just to give it even more of a live edge feel. I tried it both ways and I found it a little easier to cut if you didn't bevel the blade. Once both fake live edges were cut, I clamped the piece onto the workbench and attached a 40 grit flat disc onto my Ryobi HP cordless angle grinder. One of my favorite parts about this grinder is that it offers a toolless disc change, so I don't have to keep up with a wrench to swap out the disc that I'm using. Now, I know there are specific angle grinder discs made for wood carving, and they're pretty pricey. I didn't want to invest in expensive discs just to try out one project, then find out that I didn't even enjoy wood carving with an angle grinder and never use them again. So for this project, I just tried the 40 grit flap disc to kind of test things out. It worked really well for this small project, so for the future, I think I'll probably be investing in some specific carving discs just because I thoroughly enjoyed this process. This is where you can just kind of turn on your music and freestyle. I've sanded over all of these edges to give it a rough, uneven texture just to kind of simulate what a real live edge would look like. I've carved some places out more than others and just tried to get creative here. So I carved away both sides of the board and also just a little bit on the board ends to kind of round over and smooth out the edges. Once I was happy with the general shape of this backboard, I worked on the shelf board. I'll be gluing and screwing this onto the backboard, so to just give it a smooth square surface to attach to, I squared off the board end on the table saw. Then I repeated the steps with the jigsaw and the angle grinder on the front edge of this piece to fake another live edge. You can make this shelf piece as deep as you want, but I ended up cutting off enough to make the shelf about 7 inches deep total. Once both pieces were cut and shaped, I gave them a sanding with the orbital sander just to smooth out the edges a little bit. The angle grinder left some scratches on the edges, and I was careful not to sand all of these off as they do add a lot of character to the piece. Then it was time to apply some stain. I think the finish process made a big difference on how well these turned out. but it was a lot of trial and error to figure out what looked best. Okay, so I'm definitely not a finishing expert. I really don't even like experimenting with finishes, but for this, I know that it's pine. Clearly it's pine. Everybody is gonna know that it's pine. I just really wanted to get it as close to a real live edge as I could. So I've been experimenting, and I think I have like a recipe that will work. So what I've done on the other shelf, and what I'm going to do on this one, is apply this golden pecan stain first, followed by special walnut stain. And then on the sides here where things are rough, I'm going to use this darker stain. And then once I get it all, like the stain all applied, I'm gonna take this wire brush and like scrape it. And I did that on the other shelf, and it gave some like indentions, and it almost kind of looked like bark. So I was actually pretty impressed with that. But I'm gonna scrape it with the wire brush, and then I'm gonna sand it with 80 grit paper, just hand sand. And then in all the places where I sand off that finish, using that 80 grit sandpaper, I'm going to apply the special walnut. So, like I said, I kind of put together a quote-unquote recipe that seemed to work well, but feel free to experiment as you wish because there's really no science to this whatsoever. I applied a golden pecan stain first, followed by a special walnut stain on top of that, then applied some Kona stain just to the rough edges to help highlight them. I used a wire brush to scrape some indentions on the edges and then applied a little more of the dark stain into these indentions. This almost gave the appearance of bark on the edges. You could beat up these edges a little more with a hammer or some chisels if you wanted to as well. Then, just to soften and blend in the color variations, I hand sanded around the edges with 80 grit sandpaper and applied some special walnut here where the finish was sanded off. This just helped kind of blend in the colors and made it look more natural. Once both pieces were stained, I used some wood glue and 3-inch wood screws to attach the shelf piece onto the back piece. I used a square to keep things straight and made sure to pre-drill the holes before attaching with the screws. Now, I made these for my dad, and he wanted the shelf pieces to be attached towards the bottom of the back piece. I'm not really sure why, but that's what I did. However, you could also flip these upside down and have the shelf piece be at the top of the back piece and add some hooks underneath for like coats or an umbrella or dog leash or whatever. The beauty of building it yourself is that you can customize it however you want. Once the glue was dry, I gave the shelves a couple coats of clear poly and then used some 3-inch wood screws to attach them into the studs in the wall. I was just hanging this one shelf for pictures, so I only use one screw in the center, but I would recommend using at least 2 screws per shelf when you get ready to install them. You can install wall anchors to attach them or simply just screw them straight into the wall studs. I was seriously impressed with how realistic these came out. I'm definitely going to try this fake live edge technique on a larger scale like a coffee table or a side table soon. But these shelves were a perfect way to kind of test the waters and learn a few things before I tackle a bigger project. If you're interested in trying this project yourself, don't forget to check out the links below for more details and information, and if you enjoyed this project and can't wait to see more, I'd love if you'd subscribe so you don't miss out on what's coming next. Thanks so much for watching, friends, and until next time, happy building!